Hi, my name is Kat, and this is a continuation of a video I started um, the other day. And I wanted to just share my testimony of how I've connected with God. I've had some really significant encounters with God that have been really meaningful. So, the first time that I sensed God was when I had been married to my first husband about 2 years, and we were struggling, and we had decided to get divorced. And he had just dropped me off at my parents' house. My brother, John, was still living at home, and I was about 20 years old. And it was late at night, no one was awake in the house, and I walked into the room where my brother's desk was. It was kind of a common area, and there was a light on above his desk, and it was shining on a little sign that said, "Jesus never fails." And I remember standing there looking at that sign, and I said, "That's right, Jesus never fails." And this sense of peace came over me. And then I had these thoughts of how God was going to take care of me, everything was going to be all right. And I thought it was me just thinking those things, and I've come to believe that it was actually God speaking to me in my own thoughts. And right after that, those thoughts came, the phone rang, and my husband had called me and apologized and said he didn't want to get divorced. And so I took that as a sign from God. We reconciled, and I ended up having another child, which I'm super grateful about. The marriage did finally end in divorce, and I'd like to share what happened there. We separated again when our second child, was 3 months old. And let me back up just a little bit. After that encounter I had with the Jesus never fails moment, my life changed dramatically. Before then, I had been trying to attend church but didn't really feel connected. I had been trying to read my Bible, but it was very difficult. I thought it was super boring, and I just could barely get through reading Proverbs, which seemed like little fortune cookie snippets of words. And I'm sure it was helpful, but it was very dry for me. So after that moment of feeling God's presence, I felt like it was the Holy Spirit. I really did. And after that moment, I found a church, and I wanted to be there every time the doors were open. I started reading my Bible, and I also started listening to Bible study radio programs that were really, really helpful for me. I learned a lot, and it's like I couldn't get enough of God. So that was a significant change. And then back up again. So after that, when I was experiencing more of God and trying to connect with Him, and just taking in as much as I could. I remember one time going for a walk, and I just needed to to get out of the house, to have a minute to myself. I didn't have my son yet. I just had my daughter, who was about a year and a half. And my husband at the time, we were not doing well. And he struggled in how he cared for our daughter. It was not my, I didn't feel comfortable with how he interacted with her. He would kind of play a little rough or tease or swing her around. She didn't really like it, and he thought it was funny. That was really hard for me, to be honest. So I tried not to leave her with him. And but this one day I was just feeling really overwhelmed and he needed a break. So I went for a walk, and I was concerned about her. So it wasn't a tremendously peaceful walk, but about halfway back from the walk, I sat down on a rock and I just said, God, what do you even think of me? And the answer I heard back immediately in my own thoughts was, I really like you, and everything's going to be all right. And I thought two things. I thought, well, it's interesting that God would say that he liked me. I expected him to say that he loved me because he's God and he has to love everybody. But he said he liked me. And that really meant a lot to me. And then when he said everything's going to be all right, I knew he was referring to my daughter and, being at the house with her dad. And so when I walked through the door, my daughter and her dad were asleep on the couch. She was laying on his chest, and they were both napping, and it was a really sweet moment. And I just felt like God, the confirmation that everything was all right, also meant that he actually liked me. And that was really significant. I struggled with feeling rejected, unliked, and so I'm just, I was really grateful for that moment. So now fast forward a little bit, and we had a son, and then we separated again when he was 3 months old, and I was living in another area in California, Southern California, and I didn't have a car, so I have two little kids, and I wanted to go to church. I needed to find a church I could walk to, so I just looked in the phone book, and I found a church that I thought was in walking distance, and I really am grateful for that church that I found. It was really significant in terms of helping me grow in my relationship with God. And one of the things that would happen to me during the worship time when I closed my eyes and would just focus on God, I would see God like on his throne, and I would see myself approaching him. And then in my mind's eye, he would like turn into something really scary. And I would have to open my eyes. I would have to stop worshiping, open my eyes. It was just very scary. So thankfully, someone at that church, I was able to share what was going on with me. And he prayed about healing from issues with my father. I was very afraid of my father growing up. And so I was projecting the image of my father onto God. And what's interesting is years later, like I don't know, 25 years later, probably, God had told me in a prayer time, I'm going to bring up some of the things your father has done over the years because I don't want you to think that I would treat you that way. And so that really began a very, what's the word? Purposeful journey of healing a lot of my past stuff, which has been really significant. It's really helped me grow not only in my relationship with God, but with my husband and my children. So when I was still married to my first husband, and I was separated when my son was 3 months old. We did get back together, and we moved to South Carolina, and our marriage, so I'm struggling getting this out, so bear with me here. We moved to South Carolina when our son was 6 months old. My daughter was three and a half, I believe. And almost, yeah, between 3 and 3.5. And in South Carolina, our marriage escalated in terms of, in not a good way. We were getting in fights on a regular basis, arguments, and it was, I was being threatened with violence. Nothing had happened yet. I was told he would tell me he was going to leave me for someone else, that he was not going to provide at all, and that he was going to beat me up. So not a great situation. That was happening on like a weekly basis. So it got to be, I remember one time, okay, so I brought some worship music with me from the church in California where I really connected with God. And a lot of it was through the worship that was just really meaningful. And so I had, back in those days, this was 1983, I had a cassette tape of some really beautiful worship music, and I was playing that one day, and I heard God say to me in my own voice, in my own thoughts, but I knew it was God, do you love your daughter? And I said, yes, I'm madly in love with her. She's amazing. And he said, is this the kind of relationship you would want for her? And I said, absolutely not. And he said, well, you're my daughter, and I don't want this for you. And I knew that was God, but it did not fit with my theology. So, I mean, I just thought, well, how could that be God? Because God hates divorce. And, so I pushed it away. And a few weeks later, I don't remember how much farther down the road. Well, I would have to say within this time period, he had gotten upset with our daughter and was abusive physically. Had spanked her really beat her. It's not fun to think about, with a dowel and a stick. She had let go of the refrigerator door, and it slammed. She's 3, and so that just set him off, and he started hitting her. And I mean, he left bruises on the back of her legs. It was really traumatic for me and for her, oh, you know. So I went to him and I said, you know, you can't do this. This, you know, and he went after me, pushed me against the wall, and you know, told me to get out of his face. So I took her. You know, got her in the bathtub. Was trying to get her ready for bed, and I remember just thinking, I'm stuck. I'm 3,000 miles away from my family. I had no car, no money, no phone. He was mad at the phone company, so we didn't have a phone. When we had separated previously, I took money out of the checking account. I think we had a total of $100, and he didn't want me on the bank account. I wasn't working. I was taking care of our kids, and so I was pretty isolated. We didn't live anywhere within walking distance to stores or anything. It was pretty remote, and I was doing the best that I could at that time in my life. And anyway, so I'm giving my daughter a bath, and I'm thinking, I am stuck. And immediately I had this thought of, no, that's what battered women's shelters are for. You're never stuck. And I knew that was God speaking to me. And my husband had apologized that evening and said he was never going to do that again. So I believed him. That was the first time he had been violent towards me. And I was so broken that I didn't know how to handle the way he was treating our daughter. Thankfully, it was extremely rare, but it was not okay. And so, anyway, within that same time period, we had lived in South Carolina for a total of 6 months. Obviously, I left. I'm not there now. So, my son was turning 1, and my sister sent him a check for $25 for his birthday, which was really nice of her. Really appreciated that. And when he got home from work and school, he was going to work and then just taking some classes in the evening, so it was kind of late at night. And we were laying in bed, and I said, you know, my sister sent this money for our son, and thinking it would be nice to get him, you know, some kind of toy or whatever. And he said, no, I want to spend it on the doctor bill. He had just had an ear infection or something recently. And I said, well, I think it would be really good to spend it on a toy, you know, or something for the baby. And since I don't think my sister was sending that money to pay our bills, and we did have the money for the doctor. And he said, no, you know, I'm going to decide how we're going to spend that money. And so I just didn't think that was a great idea. I thought it was important to spend it the way I thought my sister would want it spent. And so anyway, we argued, and he said, if you say one more word, I'm going to beat the crud out of you. And I remember thinking to myself, and I admit I was pretty naive. I had never been in an abusive relationship like this before. And well, thankfully, right? I thought to myself, you know, it isn't, like, a wife should not be afraid of her husband. This is not good. So I thought I could talk to him about it, and ended up saying one more word. He jumped on me, tried to throw me out of the bed by my neck. I did end up on the floor, and went into the bathroom, saw that I had like rope burn kind of marks on my neck, and like I said, I was pretty naive. So I went back into the bed and I just said, you really hurt me. And he said, good, I intended to. Very calmly, he said, if you ever argue with me again, I will break your legs, I'll put you in the hospital, I'll do whatever I have to do. And I started praying, and I felt like God said to me, what he said was not a threat, it was a promise. And if you stay, that will happen. But if you leave, I'll go with you. And it was still a very difficult decision. But the next day, which happened to be my son's birthday, first birthday, we left. I had to wait till someone came over. Because it was his birthday, my sister-in-law, his brother's wife, came over to see how, what the plans were, how we were going to celebrate. And then I told her what happened, and she helped me get out of there. And anyway, ended up coming back to California with the two kids. I will say that I'm super grateful for the pastor at the church in California for how gracious he was to me, and in saying, you definitely tried your best. He had met with my husband at that time and said, I something's wrong here, and I don't recommend getting back together. That's before we moved to South Carolina. So he didn't say, I told you so. He just said, you tried your best, and, good for you. So we did end up getting divorced, and I'm grateful that God got me out of there. The good news is that I spoke with that husband a couple years ago. I felt like I needed to make an amends to him, and we had a very good conversation. He had pursued healing for his life, counseling, and had grown quite a bit, which is nice. And he had an opportunity to make amends to our children, which was, wonderful for them and him. And he said, we talked about me leaving, and he said, it was good that you left. He said I was capable of a lot more pain than we even had. And, basically, thank you for leaving. And I think that had I stayed, it could have been fatal, frankly. And so I moved back to California and pursued Jesus and healing for my life. Thankfully, Jesus has been incredibly faithful. He did go with me. He said if I left, he would go with me. And he did go with me, and he has been with me ever since. And I have so many other wonderful moments with God I want to share with you, and look forward to the next time. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.